Hi everyone, Sam Smyers here. I'm an artist and music producer in Los Angeles, California. Today I want to talk about how to use compression. So what is compression? Compression is the process of reducing a signal's dynamic range. Dynamic range is the difference between the loudest and quietest parts of an audio signal. You need to reduce the dynamic range of most audio signals for them to sound natural on a recording. So for example, imagine a whisper and a scream on the same audio track. If they're the same difference in loudness as they are in real life, it would be very distracting. Or think about when you're watching a TV show, you turn up the volume to hear the dialogue, but then all of a sudden the commercials come on and they're super loud, and then you have to turn down the volume. And that is an example of too much dynamic range. Additionally, many compressors have a signature sound that can be used to inject a wonderful coloration and tone into otherwise lifeless tracks. The downside of compression is that over-compression can really squeeze the life out of your music. So having a good grasp of the basics will go a long way toward understanding how compression works and confidently using it to your advantage. Let's go over some key concepts and terms that we'll need to know when using compression. The first is threshold. Threshold sets the level at which the compression effect is engaged. Only when a level passes above the threshold will it be compressed. If the threshold level is set at, say, negative 15 dB, only signal peaks that extend above that level will be compressed. The next is ratio. Ratio determines how much gain reduction your compressor applies when the signal goes above your threshold. It's called a ratio because it's expressed in comparison to the unaffected signal. The higher the first number of the ratio, the greater the factor by which the gain is reduced. Compression ratios are expressed in decibels so that a ratio of 2:1 indicates that a signal exceeding the threshold by 2 dB will be attenuated down to 1 dB above the threshold, or a signal exceeding the threshold by 8 dB will be attenuated down to 4 dB above it, etc. A ratio of 3:1 can be considered moderate compression, 5:1 would be medium compression, 8:1 starts getting into strong compression, and 20:1 through infinity-to-1 would be considered limiting, and that would ensure a signal does not exceed the amplitude of the threshold. Let's look at this chart to see what I am talking about regarding the ratios. A ratio of 1:1 has no compression applied to it, so the signal continues along the straight line. When you apply 2:1, the signal is reduced, 4:1 reduced even more, and then infinity-to-1, the signal does not go anywhere past this line. Let's look at a compressor with limiting. I have a sine wave. Here you can see a sine wave. And I have a compressor applied to the sine wave. The threshold I'm going to set to 0 dB. The ratio I am going to set to 100:1, which means it's going to be limiting. And I'm going to make sure that the output gain is set to 0. Let's go ahead and play the sine wave and bring down the threshold. So we see the threshold is at negative 15 dB, and then if we look at these meters, we will see the gain reduction being 15 dB. To figure out what the output is going to be when we have a ratio different than infinity-to-1 or a ratio that is limiting, we can use this formula, which is output equals input minus threshold over ratio plus the threshold. Let's say that our input is going to be 0 dB minus a threshold of negative 4 dB over a ratio of 4:1 plus the threshold of negative 4. So we should have an output of negative 3 dB. Let's go ahead and apply these settings to our compressor. Threshold is going to be negative 4. Ratio is going to be 4:1. Now let's go ahead and play the sine wave and see what our output is. So looking at this meter, we see that the output is negative 3 dB. So using that formula is an easy way to figure out the amount of gain reduction you are applying to your signal. Let's now go over attack time. This refers to the time it takes for the signal to become fully compressed after exceeding the threshold level. Release time is literally the opposite of attack time. More specifically, it is the time it takes for the signal to go from the compressed or attenuated state back to the original non-compressed signal. So to understand attack and release time, let's talk about transients. Transients are the initial high energy moments of a certain sound in your waveform. These bursts give our brains a lot of information about the quality of a sound. So for example, think of a nice cracking snare. As the snare hits, there is an initial peak in your waveform that slowly tapers off. That initial peak energy is your transient. These two images show transients. This yellow area is the transient of the waveform, and also here, this yellow area is the transient. When we apply gain reduction, the gain reduction will be applied to those transients, and we can see the gain reduction reducing those transients in this image here. So in my session, I have created a new track that has the sine wave playing quarter notes, and each of these notes has a transient at the beginning, which slowly tapers off to a slow release. So let's take a listen. Let's go ahead and apply a compressor. To really hear what effect a compressor has on your sound, sometimes it helps to really exaggerate the settings. So I'm going to really lower this threshold and then have a pretty high ratio and adjust the attack and release. And let's listen to how this impacts our sound. We can hear with the attack that making the attack slower allows a little bit more of the transient to come through. So we hear a little bit of a clicking sound in the beginning of each of those notes. And then when we make the attack faster, it takes off that clicking sound. We also see on this meter, there's more gain reduction being applied when we have a fast attack because there is more gain at the beginning of each of these notes. Let's go ahead and change the settings of the release. If we watch the meter here, when we change the release, we see that a fast release, this meter is going up and down pretty fast, so it's creating that pumping effect. And then when we have a slow release, it's going down slower. So the compressor is releasing a lot slower when we make this release slower. If we take a look at the metering here, we also see how the graph is changing as we change the release from fast to slow. See how it's smoother here? To visually see what impact changing the attack and release have on our sound, I bounced down this audio with different settings. The first setting that we have is fast attack and fast release, and we can see that the transient has been brought down a lot. Next, we have a fast attack and slow release. We see that beginning transient has brought down a lot, and we see some of this tail is not as thick as in this fast release. Next, we have slow attack and slow release. Because it's a slow attack, we are still allowing that initial transient to come through, so we see a pretty strong peak here. And then a slow release, that compressor is still applying gain reduction, so we see a smaller tail here. And then we have slow attack, fast release. So the compressor still has a slow attack, allowing that transient in the beginning, and then a fast release. It has a little bit of a thicker tail during that release toward the end of the note. Next, let's talk about what the knee is. The knee refers to how the compressor transitions between the non-compressed and compressed states of an audio signal running through it. Typically, compressors will offer one, or in some instances, a switchable choice between both a soft knee and a hard knee setting. Some compressors will even allow you to control the selection of any position between the two types of knees. So a knee is called a knee because it looks like the break of a knee. And in this diagram, we can see the difference between a soft knee and a hard knee. Let's go ahead and take a look at the compressor. Here is hard and soft knee. If I change it to hard, we have a harder knee, and a soft, we have a softer knee. So there we can hear the difference between changing it between a hard and soft knee. Let's talk about output gain. Because you are applying gain reduction with the compressor, you'll need to adjust the output gain to make up for the loss of volume. It is important to level match before and after applying the compressor so that you can accurately hear what effect the compressor is applying. Let's take a look at our compressor. Let me set the threshold to -20 dB. Ratio is set to 8:1. And take a look at this meter, and we will see how much gain reduction is being applied. So we see it's -11 dB. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add 11 dB to the output gain, which in this compressor, it's called wet gain. Let's go ahead and play the track with the compressor. Now without. With the compressor. So we can really hear what effect the compressor is having on our sound. Because I have a slow release, we can hear the end of each note ringing out a lot louder, and we hear that initial peak not so loud as we do when we have the compressor turned off. Using a compressor in practice requires a lot of trial and error. So when you are applying a compressor to one of your sounds in your mix, really listen to how that compressor changes your sound within your whole mix. Make some adjustments to the settings of the compressor, close your eyes, and really try to hear what that compressor is doing to your sound. Understanding the fundamentals of a compressor and understanding how each of these knobs and settings changes how a compressor works will really help you dial in the correct settings for your sound. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Thank you so much.